What's going on, party people? It's me, Rich, and I'm back again. This week, I talked to Chris Arrant. It's Chris's second time on the show. We chat conventions, we chat comics, and we chat pro wrestling. Trying to do a little something different in the comic book / pro wrestling sphere and tie this show a little bit more into Mat Men podcast. There's a huge crossover between comic fandom, comic creators, and pro wrestling. And I want to explore that just a little bit more with a few upcoming guests. Check out my interview with Chris right now. Hey guys, welcome to the show. A two-time Hall of Famer, Chris Arrant. Chris, how are you?
I'm doing good. Two-time. Yeah.
Two times, just like Goodfellas. How are you, man? How are you? The last time I talked to you, we did a little recap before we started, was probably around a year ago, and you were hinting at Popverse. I don't recall if you mentioned it by name, but you did say you were working on something really cool, and it ended up being really cool. So how is Popverse going?
It's going well. We're just past our first year, so we're at month 13 if we're counting. Since I've last talked with you on video, although I talked with you since, I hired 4 amazing people, 2 writers, 2 video producers, and I've got a bunch of freelancers that are working for us. We've been doing some great coverage in comics, movies, TV. And doing a lot of conventions. I'll say besides like some specialty blogs like the gang at Unofficial San Diego blog, like we're probably do the most convention coverage in, I guess, the comics convention space. We're not in the horror conventions yet or anything like that. We're going to our first like anime show next week, if like as we're recording, like Anime Expo, which is really good. We're excited to get into that, and we're also we're doing Florida SuperCon the same weekend, so we're doing 2 conventions, 2 teams, 1 weekend, and then we're already prepping for San Diego, of course.
Wow, and then I'm assuming New York Comic Con in October.
Yeah, we have some big plans at New York Comic Con. Like, like internally, like last year was our plan wasn't to be the best New York Comic Con, to be the first New York Comic Con. So now we're competing with ourselves for what we're doing this year. We have some pretty big plans, like in terms of like what we're writing, like who we're interviewing, the panels we're moderating. A lot hasn't been announced yet, but also in terms of like what and how we'll be filming the panels. And like I know a lot of the people that know Popverse know us from being kind of the digital extension of the Read Pop shows, like New York, C2E2, Emerald City, Florida SuperCon, and MCM. At New York last year, we live streamed some of the biggest panels that people could watch. We live streamed them for free, and then they're available later for people with a digital ticket or Popverse membership. We're looking to see what we did there, see what people liked, and do it again this coming year in the middle of October.
See, I think that is super cool. Like that, the ability to be able to live stream a panel to somebody with a digital ticket is fascinating. And it reminded me of, I think during lockdown, DC did, I forgot what it was called specifically, but they pretty much did like their digital like convention.
Yeah, they did DC Fandom. New York did a virtual convention. San Diego's done one as well. Now that conventions are back and are safer, they're not as safe, I don't think, but just there's still stuff going on. But yeah, like it's interesting the component it brings, but not just with our show. Like D23 Expo last year streamed some of their panels, which is good at Star Wars Celebration. Some of those panels were streamed. I just saw just before recording that MomoCon, which is a great con in Atlanta, not owned by ReadPop, but a great convention, is putting up some of the panels that they had from earlier this month that are online for people to watch. So like I like that for people that for one reason or another can't come to the convention or don't live close, or maybe they were busy selling artwork down on the show floor and couldn't attend it. Now that these panels are being filmed on a more regular basis, that people can watch and rewatch those things. Like I've been very fortunate to be able to give some people some good news where, I don't know, like them and their child, they were in the Steve from Blue's Clues panel from Emerald City last year and got to like ask Steve like a question, and then they're wondering if there was footage of that because they didn't think to film it with their phone. I was like, yes, like of course there is, and we had that panel that they could watch. And then there's just major like events that you can or don't see. Like we had an amazing Star Trek panel in London earlier this month that we had 4 members of the crew were beamed in, quote unquote. It was holograms. They came in from New York and LA that we filmed that. And then later this month in Florida SuperCon, we have some of the cast of Our Flag Means Death and also the cast of The Boys that are going to be there. We won't be live streaming those panels, but we will be filming those to air later in July. So people, if they couldn't get a ticket or just didn't want to make the drive down to Miami Beach, which I understand, as someone that lives in Florida, that drive all the way down to Miami Beach is a bit of a drive. Like they can still watch some of those panels from home, like once we get those online. So yeah, it's conventions are a lot. Like it's a lot more than the previous places that I worked, like CBR and unlike Newsarama, but it's like conventions are that intersection where like everybody goes for something that's their favorite.
Yeah.
And websites can be that same thing, and that's kind of where we're like I'm like aiming for, and that's what's really working for us. Like we're really excited.
It's such a cool thing, and I'm glad you guys have found like success over the last year, and it's really nice to see, especially in the comic book sphere where, as well as I do, like so many people could be negative and poo-poo on things, and sometimes things don't work out, but just the fact that you guys are continuously doing it is pretty awesome. Now, are you really into the convention scene, or do you have to do it because it's your job? I get off on the action. I love the conventions too. Like, believe me, like I would go to every single one if I could.
Yeah, like I'm really into it. Like I'm thinking about going to a local one that's in my area that's not even for work, quote unquote, but just to go there to enjoy it. Florida SuperCon, I'm not going to it currently, but there's always a chance that I just decide, hey, I'm going to make that drive down, or I'm going to buy the flight and go down there just to enjoy it. San Diego, I'm going to. New York, I'll be at. Maybe going to one or two London shows in the fall. Like, yeah, I really enjoyed it. Last year it is a lot more travel than my previous job, but it's a good thing. Last year, between San Diego and New York, it was a little bit of a but even before San Diego, there was an 8-week span where myself and the team did 4 conventions in 8 weeks. So that's like a convention week off, convention week off. And I'm learning to spread that out more while people can go to the conventions that they're the right fit for or that they're available to. We also have some amazing freelancers that can come in and like help us out, kind of like Mission Impossible. But I'm not the Tom Cruise. Like I don't know what I am, but I'm not the Tom Cruise. Maybe I'm the Ving Rhames. But
sure,
like it is a lot of fun. It is a lot of work, but we get to do some amazing stuff, and especially as all of us work remotely now, just as conventions us have this extra thing, it's also the time that we get to see our coworkers for the one of a few times a year that we get to see them.
Yeah, that's always got to be fun. Like it's a cool, if you're into it, I think it's pretty cool. I know a lot of folks who used to be into it just don't do it anymore, but like I know I'm not alone here, but I also get like kind of like a thrill out of staying in a hotel, like, and just
I get you.
Like doing something fun. And also, like, side note, people don't realize how deceptively gigantic Florida is. It's like, I'm in New York, so if somebody's like, oh, Brooklyn, oh, Manhattan, oh, whatever, Staten Island, it's pretty close. I don't gotta take a plane. But then, I know a lot of people in Florida, and it's like, oh no, I live in Orlando. There's no way I'm going south, or like I live in Miami and I'm not going to Tampa, and you think it's just like not as big as it is.
Yeah, it's I'm really big, but yeah, conventions, like no lie, like I'm excited for the different hotels that I've been able to stay at, like good and bad. I got to stay one that was on a barge in like in London. It was pretty nice. It was different.
Just floating around, or was it docked?
It was docked just outside of the convention center. It was pretty like interesting. I got to say it probably the closest thing to a capsule like hotel, like a Japanese like capsule hotel when I was in New York City for New York Comic-Con. There's some interesting ones coming up, and I'm also checking out the area and seeing what's around there in terms of like comic shops and museums. I got to see some amazing stuff. When I was in London for MCM last year, I took my wife out for our wedding like anniversary. We picked this really nice restaurant, and then I was seeing screeners for a upcoming, I can't say what it is, but there's an upcoming TV show that filmed one of their scenes at the restaurant that I have like the menu, photos, business cards, and all this stuff from. So like I'm excited, just kind of like the perks of the job that I get to travel and do these things. And sometimes it has these like extra benefits, like, hey, like I was sitting right there where I can't say who it is, but who somebody was sitting like right there next to that, and it's just pretty amazing. And plus, I get to meet people because there's amazing like writers about comics and movie and TV and comics creators that may only do London shows, or may only do Seattle shows, or may only do New York shows. That I get to see them and meet the variety of people that it's available. Because at conventions, like it's not lost on myself or any of the team that this is an amazing like opportunity. So when we're at the conventions, we try to make the most of it. In terms of asked is like, who are the interviews that it would be really hard for us to get if they weren't in this building? Like, what's the opportunities that we can take advantage of? Like, we're fortunate to have some amazing people that are friends of the sites or just open to interviews. And while we like to see them during conventions, there's always somebody big or small or medium or just not known of but should have, that is in the artist alley, that we're like, hey, like these people don't do like interviews unless you see them in person, and there's a real like opportunity for this. So we do not take that for granted in terms of written interviews, video like interviews, or just photos together, which is really nice.
Who's the holy grail of on the scene interviews? Like, I'm sure at this point you guys have interviewed thousands of people, hundreds of people, but like who's that holy grail creator or artist or writer that you're kind of like, oh, I hope he's there, I just want to talk to
him? Hope he's there, but probably not be. Probably Urasawa from 20th Century Boys and Pluto.
All right.
Coming to San Diego. That would be it. We are getting to interview one of the producers of the Pluto movie coming up at Anime Expo, which is really nice, but that's on my list. I hope to go to Japan in 2 years for Star Wars. So if he rarely does like interviews, but he has his own TV show in Japan, but he rarely does a lot outside of that. So that'd probably be number one. There's lots more. Like we spoke with Peach Momoko after New York Comic Con because of some issues with Artist Alley. Like, I'd love to do a second one with her, with like a member of my team doing that. I think that's would be really fascinating to have a real conversation, not just we want to ask you questions about your book and you plug the book and when it comes out, but just an actual honest conversation with someone, which is what you're really good at, and what I find is the best pieces for us as well, for video or like written, just to have a real good conversation with Peach, or I'll say Jim Lee. Like, I've had the opportunity to interview Jim Lee on a couple of occasions, but I would never turn down another one for that. I don't know. Like, I just before this call, I got to edit a really good interview with Trina Robbins that Samantha Puck did.
Oh, cool.
Which we're going to run next month. That's really good. But yeah, there's loads, and this is just even in the comic circle. We also do movies and TV.
Yeah.
So there's like opportunities there that that we're really like hoping for. Like, we did a piece with Brendan Fraser last year. We interviewed the cast of Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power, Star Trek. There's some opportunities coming up for us at Anime Expo and Florida SuperCon. There's some at San Diego, and there's even some at New York. Like, some of the people on that poster were lining up to do interviews either pre-show or during show, which I'm excited about.
That's awesome. I know that's always stuff like that's always good for the fans. Just like, hey, I can't wait to see what Peach Momoko is a great example. I remember that was I'm not 100% sure what happened, right? But what I do remember is that there was like a legitimate like buzz, like on the show floor and on Artist Alley, basically people kind of being like, hey, Jay, what happened? Jay, what happened? Do you know what happened? Yep. And I was like, wow, that's like, you rarely ever get something like that, it's like to happen at a show. Again, I'm not 100% sure what happened. But you really did physically and audibly hear like people talking about it, and plus, like, she's so beloved, and like everybody loves her work.
Yeah, and just for that, yeah, there was a buzz around it. Like, I remember hearing it on like Friday and Saturday, and then we had Graham go in and look to the piece, and actually not just do the hot take of what the buzz is, but we actually spoke with Peach, we spoke with her husband, we spoke with the organizers of the event to figure out what was going on, what went wrong, what was being done, and like, is everybody okay? And Graham McMillan did a really good story on that, just to expose that. And that's what some of the things, one of the things we really want to capture is what is the buzz of the convention.
Yeah.
And a lot of times that's not the big announcements in Hall H or anything like that, which will also cover that. But what is actually on the show floor? Like one of the things that I wanted to stress in our convention coverage and that we've done pretty well at is when you, like other sites, when you read about a convention, you may not hear anything about what's on the show floor, what's in Artist Alley, what's going on. But we're really getting into it, and I'm like figure out what is actually going on. What are people talking about? What do people want to hear about? And also just loads of photos. Like during convention weekends, like our social media is full of photos of cosplayers, creators, interesting things. We're starting to do some booth spotlights on social media of some of the biggest booths. So like if you can't be there, like by the first or second day, we'll have walkthroughs of the biggest booths. And that's not just at ReedPop shows, but San Diego, Anime Expo, things like that. We did that at D23, and also even just kind of just going where people are at and going beyond what's in the panel rooms just to see what's going on. Like there's something we did a little bit of last year at San Diego that I'm really excited about. Me and the team are joking about it, is how San Diego is such a dog-friendly convention. And we really want to go into that. And there's the joke of us one day turning Popverse into Pupverse for a week, PUP. But yeah, we're all like dog lovers here, and just doing something on that just kind of aspect of it that's out there, and just to really get kind of the thing that this is, this huge gathering of people, and just what happens when 100,000, 200,000 people who share similar like interests get together for like a weekend, and all the good and maybe sometimes the bad, but like all the good things that can come out of that, all the interesting connections, the unique like meetups that we see. Like there's a lot of stuff to that. And this year, for when possible, one of the things we're going to do better about is kind of pulling back the curtain on some of the backstage elements that we can show at like the ReedPop shows, not to violate anybody's privacy, like especially like celebrities or anything that. But I think there's some interesting things in that kind of the behind the scenes that people would be interested in to see. And there's also stuff that I'm working on. We're working on now. I guess this is a minor like announcement, but since we moderate some of the big panels at San Diego and New York, and C2E2 is we're working on a way where some of our members of our site can basically submit questions that we ask on stage. So like you, for instance, if you're a fan of Chris Evans, there's a Chris Evans panel at C2E2. We could, for instance, I'm not saying Chris Evans is the one, if you were a member, you could submit questions, and then when we review over the questions that we ask, like if we chose your question, we would not only say the question, but we would say your name and like where you're from, and do that in the course of the panel, like in front of 2,000-3,000 people in the room, but also the 50 to 100,000 people that are watching it online live. So yeah, pretty exciting.
That's cool. Like I love the interactivity of all that stuff, you know, and especially like I'm a big fan of specificity, you know, like I know why I go to conventions, but I'm always blown away as to like why my buddies go or why so-and-so goes, you know, and it's always a very different thing. Like I got a friend who's just like, he's in it for the Ninja Turtles and that's it. He's just looking for cool turtle stuff for 4 days, and really anything outside of that, he just doesn't care for, you know? And then I think it's also in hand with that is, the older you get, the more you kind of see what like young fans are into, you know? And I find that whole thing like fascinating, and you being there and just kind of like seeing this ocean and like this swarm of people day by day holding different things and doing different things, like that must shift your perspective in the way that you could better cater what you're doing.
Yeah. Really just understanding what the fans want and where they want it and how they want it, and also being able to see such vastly different conventions gives us a better perspective on not
Mm.
just what the, I don't know, quote unquote, like traditional comics fans want, but what fans want, and just paying attention to that through what they're telling us on social media, to what they're telling us by what they visit, to what they're saying at conventions, and also what they're participating in at conventions. Like last year, I did Florida SuperCon for the first time, and it is a vastly different convention experience than like a traditional like comics convention, like a Heroes Con or a C2E2 or like a WonderCon or like a New York Comic Con. And in some ways, I think Florida SuperCon is kind of ahead of the curve in terms of Florida SuperCon. I've said in some places that it's kind of, in some ways, it's a prototype for what I personally think like comic conventions may turn into in the next like 5 or 10 years, like on like a smaller scale, which is interesting. Like they have a like anecdotally from what I see, it has a much younger like base of like people that attend, and it means different engagement. So they're like engage with different fandoms, engage with different mediums, and also they enjoy stuff differently too, which is fascinating, like an amazing. And there's ways to write and do videos for all kinds of people, and ways that kind of give them what they need to keep going.
That's pretty fantastic. Now, in your what might be a tough question. It might be a loaded question. In your opinion, as a person who worked conventions and loves conventions, if you could succinctly say, what would be your ideal con? One, for a fan, and two, for you, what would you say?
My favorite convention, like even before I had this job, I think I posted it in some blogs, and even at my previous job, has been C2E2.
Okay.
Especially in like in the years when they had a B2B component. It was the Diamond Retailer Summit that they had in the days before. Like C2E2, it's an amazing building. I love Chicago. The convention really fits. The comic creator community really, really comes out for that show.
Yeah.
Like in a way that's just authentic and amazing. Like that buzz, like the artist alley of C2E2 reminds me of Heroes Con or Thought Bubble, and like in a very good way, that they're cool. Like they're there for it. And just I've been to C2E2 more than any other comic convention, even San Diego or New York. And so I've seen how it can change like over the years, but even in ways it's stretching, it's been really good. So that's, for me, it's also the perfect size where it's not too big and not too small. Not that I don't enjoy a good big convention and a good small convention, but C2E2 is a very tight, like 3 days, and there's more than enough to do. As for someone that's maybe, did you say like a first timer for like a convention?
Yeah, if somebody, because I think it's very daunting, and you and I probably both know people who are like, I would love to go, but I am terrified because of just like, I don't know what to do. It's so big, and there's 100,000 people, especially I think New York or San Diego, because the New York Comic Con is really all we have that's like that kind of like giant media attraction. Like there's tons of cons. There's like in the area, but it's very old school, very much like a bunch of retailers and maybe a decent artist alley, but no like big booths and announcements and panels and all that stuff,
Yeah. I would say your first convention should be a small, like regional show, like a Heroes Con or like a MegaCon or a WonderCon or Emerald City or something like that. And you don't need to do all the days of the convention. I say this as someone that works for a company that does events, but I think it's sort of like how I tell people to do the theme parks, is just pick a day, go for one day, but not be the last day. So if you decide you want to come back, you can go back and buy a second day ticket, but then make a list of the things you want to do and put that in priority, like order. I do the same thing for theme parks. I do the same thing for museums. I just come up with a top 5 list. I do those top 5 things, and then if I have time, I'll do I'm like other stuff, because conventions, unless you're very savvy and very discriminate, it's hard to fit everything into one day or 2 days or even 3 days, because you're always, to make a choice to go to a panel means you're not going to this other panel or this other event or meetup or demonstration. So I'll just really pick the things you want to go to for that. and just kind of choosing your battles, so to speak, for that. But I would do a small convention first, and then if you're in the area or you can travel, do one of the bigger shows like San Diego, New York, Dragon Con. I'd say a MegaCon is like getting near that point to be like a huge show.
Mm-hmm.
Going back to one of the regional shows, it could be like a Fan Expo 2 or something like that. Or like if you're in South America, that CCXP is huge. It's as big as New York Comic Con or San Diego.
Wow.
In Brazil, and they have mainstream guests. They're just as big as in terms of big booths, big announcements. Like that'd be big. Or if you're in Japan, go to one of like the doujinshi shows or like Comiket, or there's other things like that all over the world. But I would definitely say try a small one first, so you can see it, and you also have a means of comparison for when you go back to one of these bigger shows. I think you can appreciate the scale being bigger, but also appreciate the scale being smaller. But bring some headphones so you can tune out, and just wear some comfortable shoes and battery chargers, and just I don't know, don't try to plan too many things.
That's great advice, and I think folks who are into comics and into media, and let's be honest, it's beyond comics at this point. Those are good pointers. I think folks need those pointers, especially when they're trying to venture out and do something kind of fun like this. Conventions, obviously, conventions are supposed to be, like you said, going to a theme park almost, where like you want to have fun, leave all your nonsense at the door, and if you're going to go for a 3 or 4 day thing, have 3 or 4 days of just like fantastic times and hopefully no con crud.
Yeah. Yeah, there's ways to do that. I still think like the 1 day or the 2 day, if your budget allows, is a good way in. Not that I have anything against the people that do 3 days and 4 days, but it becomes like a marathon then. Like even for theme parks, like I'm planning a trip to Disney World. I'm not going to do 3 days like in a row. Like I'm not. My mind is not built for that. So we'll do 2 days, take a break, and then do the third day later or something like that. So for conventions, I would just choose your battles. Like a friend of mine is doing San Diego for the first time this time next month. And like I'm advising them when the panel schedule will be announced, and them just to choose a day, maybe 2, that they want to go, and then just like other than that, like I recommend doing the show floor on Wednesday night if you can. That's when the lowest foot traffic is, but not try to do everything, because it's too much. It's too much even for the organizers. Like I know some friends that work San Diego, some coworkers that work like New York Comic Con, that even when you work there, you won't see all aspects of the show. It's just impossible.
Oh yeah, for sure. Like I apart from like working the show for whatever I've been doing and even walking it, like I talked to somebody the next day and they'd be like, "Oh, did you see this thing?" And I'm like, "I didn't even know that was there." Like I totally missed it. I was too busy getting stuck in that alleyway where they're selling like weird knives and goth backpacks.
I get you there.
Do you get the analytics of the foot traffic during the shows at all? Like hey, it really perked up at about 3 p.m.
I don't like I don't really wade into that too much. But I can see just anecdotally based on foot traffic patterns. And at New York, for instance, Popverse had a skybox, so I could literally see, like I was 20 feet up in the air, I could get a big picture view and could see where like the masses of people were, and where like big things were happening, and also how crowds like reacted to certain things going on, especially signings, like celebrity signings, where they're just there for specific hours, and how like conventions like accommodate for that. And I saw that firsthand at San Diego last year, just in terms of like the people flow and how they organize the people to go through certain doors at certain times of the day and other doors during other times of the day, just based on foot traffic, and also so they don't like reach capacity with the fire marshal for basically one of their areas or something like that. So it's how they do it and how they can deal with that many people and still be good at customer service.
See, that stuff I find fascinating. Like I think, and New York Comic Con just put up the sales for everybody at this point, or like fan verification.
The New York Comic Con tickets are on sale.
And I always feel like that should be limited. Not, I don't know, like limited is too strong a word, but like I think the year after COVID, the first show back, that was the perfect amount of attendance. in my opinion, but I understand, like, it's a business, you need to sell tickets. That was the perfect amount of attendance because it was like you could walk through all the aisles and be fine. And, it wasn't like a fight or flight thing that I feel like a lot of people experience, It wasn't like being in a zombie movie, I guess,
Yeah, there is like a good balance for that. I'm smart enough that I don't know like what that balance is and what the metrics are for
right.
raising ticket prices versus selling more tickets.
Mm-hmm.
For that. Like I'm really fascinated for us, like what we do and what I see some other conventions doing is selling like a digital ticket experience where they can, like for instance, for New York Comic Con, you can buy a digital ticket where you get to see all the panels that we film as part of the digital ticket. And there's even like options to get exclusive merch from New York Comic Con. Like we have a New York Comic Con tracksuit and a New York Comic Con shirt and a hat that people can get. And we're also looking at like other like items that if you're not coming to the convention, but you want to experience it like you're there, like we're working on more options for that.
That's awesome. I made a big blunder a few years ago where I got a pro digital ticket and didn't realize that it was just for like a stay at home thing. And I emailed Reed Pop a million times, basically like, yo, I effed up. Can I get a ticket? And then like somebody was nice enough to be like, yeah, don't be stupid. Like just give us this amount of money and you can go to the show. And I'm like, oh my God, that's it. And also that's the thing. Like you guys are great with customer service. I feel like people don't talk about that enough.
Yeah. I deal with some of the customer service, but we have a really great team that deals with it for Popverse and for Reed Pop as a whole. And like I can understand firsthand that buying tickets is a nerve-wracking experience. Like even buying tickets for movies now where you got to choose the seat and you have this time span. Like I just bought tickets to go see The Cure, and just there was this frightening prospect of like you have this X amount of time before your like window closes, and are you going to get tickets and stuff like that. That's really like nerve-wracking. Like we did a thing this year where if they were members of Popverse, they got to buy New York Comic Con tickets early for this window of time, and like even that was nerve-wracking for everybody because they wanted to make sure they had their login information, and they want to make sure that they could do it and they could buy tickets for themselves and their family, and they can get that all sorted out because it's a very nerve-wracking experiences. And like I've been reporting on conventions like from the outside going on 15 years now, and I even reported on New York Comic Con when they've had like issues. Like I reported on that for tickets before I was at Popverse, and also last year when I was at last year here at Popverse. So we're a site owned by Reed Pop, reporting on problems that Reed Pop New York Comic Con has, and we figured out a way to handle that where we could be truthful and how we're connected, but also kind of point out the problems and ask like what the improvements are and could transmit that to people.
It's good for transparency, like you don't want your quote unquote corporate overlords to say like, hey, I know it's not perfect, but don't you tell them it's not perfect. You tell them it's fucking perfect. Like you don't want that at all.
Yeah. That's the thing. When I started here, that I was wanted to be very sure, like every site seems to be a certain size has to have a corporation behind it. And like even when like Popverse is owned by Reed Pop, CBR is owned by Valnet, Bleeding Cool is owned by like Avatar, which publishes comics. There's different like organizations at Flow, and I still think there's a way to be transparent about it and just let people know like any biases or anything that may or may not influence, but still like a report the story, like even when it's difficult. Like if people want to read it, if enough people want to read it, like we need to do the story. Like even if we're not the quote unquote perfect place to do it, like we still need to make a good effort to report something when it's good and report something when it's bad. But I'm like a lot of it is just transmitting like information and just trying to get out of the way of the news and just let the news speak for itself.
Yeah, that's the way. This is non-biased reporting, right? What happened? What happened to that novel idea?
Yeah.
All right, so let's flip it a little bit. One of the other reasons I wanted to have you on is because the last time we kind of touched on it very, 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 very minutely. You are a huge professional wrestling fan, right?
Huge,
yeah. Right. I want to pick your brain a little bit. I co-host another show called Mat Men. I'm also a huge professional wrestling fan. I'm a huge comic book fan. How do you feel about this crossover between comics and wrestling, not only at conventions, but in general? I feel like it's a synergy that should have been happening for the last 40 years.
That's interesting. Like I've wrote versions of this as stories. I've even got one that I commissioned coming up by like one of our writers named Sam Stone that looks into that. And there has been that crossover. It just hasn't been as prevalent as it is now. Like I still miss the heyday of when Boom Studios had the WWE license. They did some amazing stuff like a Undertaker, like origin comic, and my friend Land did a great Nakamura short for a piece. There was the great New Day stuff, but it goes back. Like Jushin Thunder Liger is based on a manga. Like it is a manga character come to life. Like Sting is based on the Crow. There's all these things. Like Hulk Hogan is based on the Incredible Hulk, because when he was in like Memphis, like somebody said that he looked as big as the Hulk, and this that. But and then there's like the '90s like WCW comics, which are fascinating. They've
100%.
People need to read that, especially for the bit where Sting and a child fan enjoys cake together. And it's just so utterly bonkers. And there's like amazing stuff. Like there's so much out there, but you're right. Things are like much bigger now, and I think it has the potential for more. Like there's when AEW was launching, they partnered with DC through that Warner Brothers connection to have DC Comics artists like Ramon Villalobos do character portraits of some of the AEW wrestlers like at the time. Like there's other stuff going on. There's WWE has done comics themselves. WWE has published comics themselves in their magazines back when they did magazines. But there's fascinating stuff in the '90s. Like there's so much stuff that I wish was reprinted. Like I'm going to tell you this, and then the people that are watching are going to look this up. Okay, Steve Ditko, the guy that created Spider-Man, did '90s WWF comics with the Undertaker. Yes, so Steve Ditko drawing the Undertaker in the '90s happened at Valiant with, I think it was Valiant, but it was one of Jim Shooter's company. He hired Steve Ditko to draw WWF comics, and it's never been reprinted because rights are like a weird thing. But there's so much like fascinating stuff. But then there's new stuff like the Daniel Warren Johnson like do a power bomb, which is probably probably top 3 most enjoyable comics reading experiences I've ever had. Just besides the fact that the comic is really good, it is really fun to read. Just read that comic and be totally immersed in it. Like some comics you can read while you're doing something else, but that one is, you need to be fully engaged from it, and it is amazing to just lose yourself in a comic like that.
For a wrestling fan, I think that may be a perfect comic, and I know he's a gigantic wrestling fan. When comics hit that note, perfect, right? There's so many people that detract both genres, that detract professional wrestling and comic books. But when something's done right, much like in both things, it's perfect, right?
Yeah, like there's even, like you mentioned that with like the Okada move. Like there's like in '90s, like in the Ron Mars, Daryl Banks, there's Kyle Rayner gives someone a DDT very specifically, like a take the Snake Roberts, like you slap the back and you do the snap, and it's in there. And Daryl's like confirmed that like he was doing moves. Like there's some fascinating stuff out there. Like there was I was talking with Greg Capullo, and he shared me these sketches when he was working for Todd McFarlane. This was before he returned to comics. So this was right before Haunt and Batman. Like Todd McFarlane was in talks to get the license to do WWE like action figures. So Greg did a bunch of these concept art of WWE like characters. So I got to see these amazing sketches by Greg Capullo that I think have never been released, of like him drawing like the Undertaker, like Triple H, Mick Foley, like the Three Faces of Foley, Stone Cold Steve Austin, like drawn by Greg Capullo at like the height of his powers. It's just so amazing. And I think there is this big crossover between superheroes and pro wrestling. I think they both have the same origin, where
Mm-hmm.
it was Action Comics and real wrestling, and people wanted to make it more identifiable. So they're like colorful outfits, like storylines that clearly marked who's the good guy and like who is like the bad guy. Hey, we can do masks, we can do character names,
Mm-hmm.
we to make these more memorable. Like they both kind of happened around the same time. Like what we know as professional wrestling, like was created by this group of promoters called the Gold Dust Trio, and
Mm-hmm.
around the same time is when like also comic strip superheroes like the Phantom were segueing into
Yeah.
comic book superheroes like Superman, and it's all just so fascinating that all it came together. And then they've always been like on like acting like concurrently, and there's even like pro wrestlers that have written comics. There's comics creators like Andy um like
Belanger.
Bellinger, that's like
Yeah.
yeah, that is like a working comic artist and a working professional wrestler, and that's just I just think that's amazing.
Yeah, it's wild stuff. Like, or Butcher from AW, who's like
Yeah,
a working wrestler and a working touring musician, for the most part.
yeah. There's
Like
even
that.
stuff like yeah, like I
Good.
remember when Mick Foley was writing the WWE comic for Paper Cuts,
Mm-hmm.
and I got to interview him because hey, comics, and I got to talk with Mick Foley one about writing comics. Like he had wrote comics before, some creator-owned comics, but now he was doing this, and it was fascinating to him. And he's long had a connection with comics, going back to
Yeah.
working with Jill Thompson, who's done a lot of work for different pro wrestlers. But then Mick
Mm-hmm.
Foley, I got to find this like interesting story where he was neighborhood, his family was friends, and they lived in the same neighborhood as John Buscema. I'll
Yeah.
mispronounce his name because I'm more in the typing names than say it. So like
Mm-hmm.
he hung out with John's like kids, and they like he would go over to his house and would see John drawing like Silver Surfer, like, and Mick
Mm-hmm.
Foley would just see this, and it was just like amazing. But like the connection is so like there, it's on the nose. Like it's both superhero comics were born in New York City. Pro wrestling, in many cases, was born in New York City. There's a lot of overlap there, and it's
Yeah.
just continuing today. Like I think there's, I think I don't have any inside knowledge, but I can see a way where AEW would have its license for comics done out to somebody for some kind of project, and I think there's a lot more that could be done.
I would love that. I would honestly like 100% love that. And it's funny, like, like you mentioned, it's kind of like it there's the ebb and flow of it, and it kind of just like, there's tons of comic creators that are fans, and there's tons of wrestlers that are fans of comics, so it's like I think now we're getting to see that like really up close. I remember years ago, my wife, she'll put up with the wrestling stuff, doesn't really care for it for the most part. But I do remember specific instances where I remember years and years ago, I was like, before she was my wife, I was like, hey, by the way, Jill Thompson designed Daniel Bryan's tights. And then she was like, I'm a fan. That's it. Like it took that because, she's a huge Jill Thompson
Yeah,
fan from like everything she's done. Um, and like now, you get a guy like Dan Housen who's posting his like Holy Grail comic collection,
yeah,
which is like fascinating, like all that, and Ethan Page, like
yeah,
just like doing his tours of like toy stores and comic book things. I do think there needs to be more. I would love AEW to. This is the initial thing like that I thought was when those promos that you saw in the DC books started happening. I was like, oh, are they gonna put Kenny Omega and Green Lantern? I'd be there for it.
yeah. Like they've like it's wild that it'd be interesting for that could happen. But DC has done that before. They had the original Rock, Antonio Rocca in the
Oh
'70s was
yeah.
like was in Superman comics. Like
Mm,
it's like that kind of stuff has happened like before, and it can happen again. Like you think like the like Ali Superman thing was like a once in a
mm.
generation thing, but I could like easily see like somebody smart with a comics publisher do that if they had characters that they own that they wanted to mash with characters from like pro wrestling.
There's a part of me also like if you want to do like some fanboy nonsense right now, there's a part of me that wishes it was instead of DC, the AEW stuff did a little Marvel. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like imagine just and I just thought of this. I'm gonna throw it out there. Have you been reading X Force?
Yes, I have.
Great book, right? Like
Mhm.
it's been top to bottom awesome. introducing Kenny Omega as Kid Omega's brother or cousin, and give him some kind of like insane power, where when it's time to fight, he's the best fighter, like best bout
Yeah.
machine style, something like that. I think there's so much potential to see like the characters on screen jump onto the page, and also good.
Like I would see something like I love the Marvel versus Street Fighter game, and Marvel like even
Yep.
did an adaptation of it once. Like I'd be interested for some kind of special series where it was maybe Marvel versus like AEW or Marvel versus WWE, where they did it as a special event series and really get with some creators that kind of know the material and know what kind of can be like fast and loose and knows what needs to stay like a legitimate to really mix those two worlds together. Yeah, like I think there could be something there, but like I don't know about integrating it into the main continuity thing, because then if they lose the license or something like that, then it becomes like weird for how that works,
Yeah, it becomes like a whole I always think about Spawn when somebody mentions like licensing, like the whole chapel
Yeah,
thing, or like
there's Spawn, or even like the old like Marvel like GI Joes and Transformer comics, or even like there's elements of what like the microverse that Marvel can't
right.
use because they did it in the Micronauts comics, and there's like characters in GI Joe and Transformers. Like there's a Spider-Man crossover with I think Transformers that has never been like reprinted just because the rights are so complicated. So
Yeah, that's unfortunate too, and I think Marvel, I might be wrong about this, but I feel like Marvel with a lot of their stuff is still not 100% after their Chapter 11 filing. Like it just seems like it's like 99% there, but I feel like there's stuff that's just like everywhere. Like they reintroduced ROM like a year ago.
yeah, well they they reintroduced the concept of the Space Knights, but now they have the
Right.
rights to reprint the old comics. But like ROM is was based on a toy, so the manufacturer of the toy owns the key rights, owns the toy, and then they license out the rights to Marvel. But when they lose it, that goes with them. And so that way it kind of needs to be in its own bubble. So yeah, like there's ways like around it for maybe like a special event kind of thing, or something like that. But yeah, it's hard. Like as I see more of the business side from dealing with Popverse, like I can understand more some of the business decisions that are made with comics publishers.
Yeah, and the wrestling thing probably falls into that too.
Yeah,
Where
definitely.
it's got to make everybody happy to a certain like extent.
Yeah,
And it
but I
can't.
definitely
Yeah.
think there's like collaborations that could work. Like there was that unique collaboration with Marvel and Eminem, where like Eminem was on a variant cover for Spider-Man #1,
Oh
and
yeah, yeah.
that did really well for people. I think there's more stuff like that coming, but I think that same thing could be done with AEW or WWE, especially because they do their own merch or they have third parties like pro wrestling tees for AEW, the WWE's like in-house like merch thing. I definitely think there's some collaboration there. Like who would not want like a Daniel Warren Johnson, um, John Moxley like illustration that became a T-shirt, that became a poster, that became a I don't know, like a wrestling buddy or something like that.
Yeah, I think he just did one with Christopher Daniels.
Yep, I
Like
could definitely
maybe
see
like
that.
2 months ago. Like I think it was just like a one-off thing on Pro Wrestling Tees. Do you guys have t-shirts? Would Popverse put anything on Pro Wrestling Tees?
Um, we have a great internal merch store, and we have talked
Okay.
about doing T-shirts. I've seen a design for there's stuff in the works for merchandise for Popverse that I'm looking forward to showing off at a convention later this year. Be some pretty cool stuff.
Awesome. What again, I love talking to big wrestling fans. What does it for you right now?
Um, Story wise, I really like the Bloodline story and the turns that it's taken, especially like the post not full breakup of like the Bloodline, but how they're taking that to like a logical, I'll say, conclusion. Like I was listening to, and this is kind of like this massive story that's kind of
Hmm.
has a beginning that so far, like an ending that so far seems to start out as the beginning, which is something that we never got with like NWO or like anything like that. To have this grand finale and have it
Yeah.
segue into something else, which has been really fascinating for me. And it almost like harkens back to this old style of pro wrestling where it's like storytelling, and the matches can be good wrestling, but the storytelling carries just as much of the kind of the interest as the wrestling does. Similar to like 90s with like the Attitude Era. Like people say like the Attitude Era had like amazing wrestling. It did, but there was also a lot of Raws and Nitros with 2 or 3 minute matches where you're not getting much of anything, but you get the good matches at the pay-per-view. So you kind of have that special event. I think like Roman Reigns and Cody are really good at that level of storytelling, but also the Usos, who I admit, like for the first 5-6 years, like I had them at the same level as the Colognes, like in my mind.
Wow.
I did not give them their respect. And then like Roman Reigns kind of turned me around, especially when I realized that he is like a modern day Kevin Nash. Like even when he was in the Shield, I could see he's like modern day like Kevin Nash. Like even besides like the hair flip, and but that's really been like interesting to see him come into his own. Like for the AEW, like I kind of really like the secondary scene, like some of like the politics and like what they say is going on backstage and how they're conveniently using it for ratings is interesting, but it's kind of turning me off. So like I'm really like interested in the Orange Cassidy like title story. Like that's been some amazing storytelling, especially just I don't know, just the constraints over what people thought that the Orange Cassidy character could do.
Right.
And then him doing all of this, like it shows that just the performer has just this amazing breadth and they can tell the story, but then also the AEW is giving the room to tell this serialized story that kind of comes together. I'm like really interested to watch like the video packages that come together, like when this raid ends or just like whatever it turns into. Like it opens the doors in some fascinating places. Yeah, like I'm watching a bit of Stardom, which has been really great. But mostly like AEW and WWE.
Yeah, same here. I think the Orange Cassidy stuff is fascinating. I'm gonna go backwards a little bit because like he's always been a fantastic worker, and I think like in a landscape of other fantastic workers, he found the thing. You know, he found the one thing that got him over, and I think like it would be a lot there, and it's interesting in like how that doesn't happen for everybody. But he found this thing. Essentially Paul Rudd from Wet Hot American Summer and turned it into like this. Like people love Orange Cassidy. He's always mentioned, like whenever I ask like folks or talk to folks about AEW, I was like, oh, who do you like? They're like, oh, I like Kenny Omega, I like Malachi, I like Hobbs, and I like Orange Cassidy like a lot, like a lot. So I kind of want to see where that goes also. And it's funny to be in a certain regard, to be like an adult who's really into pro wrestling and being like, yeah, you know what? That Roman Reigns guy, that guy's awesome. That guy's fantastic, because there's that other side of it where people don't believe there's validity to the character.
Yeah, like I think it's because we both come from superhero comics that we can understand and appreciate that. Like even there's some people that for pro wrestling it's all about work rate and like stars on matches and stuff like that, and I can appreciate that. But I like just as like I like more than just action movies and like well done art house movies. I also like comedies and stuff like that. And it's great how superheroes like it's great how superhero comics and comics in general, but also pro wrestling can provide that comedy and also get serious. Like they're telling a pretty serious story with what some people would say is a comedy character in Orange Cassidy, the same way Mick Foley at the tail end of his WWE like wrestling career like went from comedy to serious. Goldust, and you can see like Dustin's like internal struggles with the character, but how like having that character kind of gave this this thing to kind of paint this amazing picture with. And so yeah, I'm really excited for that for Orange Cassidy.
How are you feeling about the Forbidden Door coming up?
I am really excited about it. I was planning on having a watch party. I was going to do a lot of stuff, and then I realized that I need to leave that day to drive to see The Cure. So I'm going to figure out a way to watch it. But yeah, the lineup seems much better than last year. Nothing against last year. Last year was like a card that on paper was like but it turned out to be really, really great. Like I remember
Yeah.
watching that. I'm with my friends, and we were just continually impressed. So
Mm.
now it's like this, like just on paper, it sounds so much better that like you almost don't need more matches being announced. Like I think the
Yeah.
first two matches, I was like, I'm good. Like I don't need anything else. Like this is like it's almost like a UFC or like a boxing like pay-per-view where you just need those two matches, but they keep like adding more, which is really fascinating. I'm
Yeah.
curious to see if they like I haven't read spoilers or anything to see if they do any because they have the Japanese talent over if they have them for like Collision on that Saturday or they tape anything special or have people over for like maybe the Wednesday like after. I'm really curious to see what they do.
I would think so. I feel like we're gonna get. I'll agree with you first. Let me get that out of the way. If the whole 3 hour pay-per-view was Kenny Omega and Will Ospreay, Tanahashi MJF, and Danielson Okada, I'd be like, let them wrestle 3 hour and let them each wrestle an hour and 20-minute match. I would be happy. I would be so happy, right? I think we're gonna get a Kenta thing this week.
Yeah.
For CM Punk, right? Sonata versus Jungle Boy, for me, I feel like that came out of left field, but I'm anxious to see it. I kind of want to see what these guys do. I think there's going to be at least like 1 or 2 more big announcements before the week is over. Maybe on Collision, maybe Kenta shows up on Collision this week and says, hey, tomorrow night we're doing it. And I also think there's going to be some kind of tag team thing with Eddie Kingston.
Yeah, I think it's gonna be a tag team or like
Yeah.
a trios thing. I hope they don't do like just like a battle royale just to get everybody on the card or anything like that. But as
Yeah.
New Japan is prone to do in their big shows, but yeah, like I'm pretty much going to be happy, and like anything else, it will just be given grace. But it's also fascinating how like you list that card, and that's not even most of my favorite wrestlers in AEW. Not that I don't like those, but there's so
Mm-hmm.
much more potential there that like, who does not want to see Miro versus Okada? Like, I would love to see something
Yeah,
like that.
for
Just
sure.
like the promos and everything else. Like, there's so much more that they can do with that. And just having this as like a once a year thing is like something as a wrestling fan 10 years ago to be unheard of to have
Right.
this yearly crossover like event. Like I remember watching the Invasion pay-per-view and just the promise of it was so amazing. I remember at the
Mm-hmm.
time it was like the highest pay-per-view like of the year, like more so than WrestleMania, and then they couldn't replicate that. And just having this reminds me of the '90s Worlds Collide event, like or even like
Oh,
TNA when they
yeah.
when they did one of the Bound for Glories in Japan, but it didn't have that promise of that. So yeah, like I'm really hoping they do this and not try to turn it into more like just do it for this and maybe just one match here or there, do it for this. But I also think there's room to do it for like I don't know if you do it with like Triple A or like other promotions too.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a way to make it like even bigger.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's also like this one is shows like this are straight up for like those niche fans, and it's like and immediately you're fantasy booking, like you want like X, Y, and Z happening. You want Muda to be on the card. You want like all these guys. You want like Kota Ibushi to show up, or like I think Shibata's wrestling, or
I
he's
think so,
wrestling
yeah.
this week. Yeah, or like your Zack Sabre Jr., like your New Japan standouts, and then why not Mercedes showing up, or what if Julia showed up? Like that would be ridiculous. Like if you want to talk about a Forbidden Door, I feel like there's so many different little outlets and notes that you could hit. Like what better way to introduce Julia to like an American audience?
Yeah, like I think there's even the flip side of that. This is more the business hat. Like, what if they did Forbidden Door next year, but did it in Japan?
Oh my
As like
god,
AEW's like first show in Japan. Like that would be all kinds of amazing.
I'd go to that. I'm also like I've been wanting to go to a Wrestle Kingdom for like the last who knows how many
Yeah,
years, and I feel like that for me that's my grail of a trip. Do a nice vacation in Japan and have it coincide with Wrestle Kingdom.
yeah, that's the dream right there. I don't know if I could do that, but when I do go to Japan for Star Wars, I will see what other pro wrestling is there because I want to see some of those stadiums. Just
Mhm.
like even if there's not like matches, just to see like the Tokyo Dome and like some
Yeah,
of the gyms that they wrestle in would be amazing.
yeah, for sure. And you'd probably end up meeting a couple of people, along the way, which is also like a little icing on the cake.
Yeah,
Cool.
yeah,
All right,
exactly.
let's wrap it up. Thank you for coming on, man. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. It's really
Yeah.
been really good. Like maybe we should make this an annual thing. Like we just check in right before San Diego like each year, man.
Sure.
No lie, like I'm excited on the guest list. Like I found out about it at the same time that everybody else did. That we have Sting and FTR are going to
Wow.
be at New York Comic Con on the whole weekend, which is fascinating. I don't think I don't have any inside like information, but just I would love it if AEW did like a New York run like during that same time period. Not saying like Madison Square Gardens, but hey, why not? But maybe do it like
Yeah.
somewhere else during the same weekend as New York Comic Con, because Reed Pop's done it before. Like the C2E2
Yeah.
2020 was the same weekend as a AEW pay-per-view, and they did a joint ticket where you could buy a ticket to the con and to the wrestling show. So
that'd be cool. Last year, well, I think the last 2 years, AEW has done Grand Slam at Arthur Ashe Stadium, which is always in like September. You know, why not? Why not push it back a month? Have it that Wednesday, the day before New York Comic Con, and that way everybody's in town. When we get off the air, I'm going to tell you a banana story, but I think it would work out in that regard. You know?
Yeah. Or maybe just rent out the old like Hammerstein or like something like that and do a show there. I don't know. There's stuff that could be done, or just I don't know, do some dark like tapings that make it like a like make it a thing.
Yeah.
Who knows? But yeah, thanks for having me. This has been really fun.
Chris, I appreciate you coming on, man. Like this was a lot of fun. We got to talk about wrestling and comic books. So like what's good in life? That's what's good in life, right?
Yep, that's it.
Cool, man. Chris is one of my favorite guests. I love it when he comes on. He is so knowledgeable about pretty much everything that we've talked about. And I love hearing him talk so passionately about whether it's comics, the convention scene, or pro wrestling, or any kind of coverage that he does. He's got a ton of stories, and I'm looking forward to the next meeting, which will probably be at New York Comic Con, and I'll go bother him at the Javits Center. That being said, guys, I know I don't do the show every week or every 2 weeks, but I'm still doing it, and we're moving. We're moving along. I have a few things planned for the show. Like I said, I'd like to do more of a crossover between the comic book stuff and the wrestling stuff, and maybe a new coat of paint as far as the design goes for the show. As much as I like the current color scheme, I think I might change it up a little bit soon, and I will keep you posted. Remember, hit that subscribe button for BTC 2.0, and remember to check out Matt Men every week on YouTube and iTunes. Later.